Who wants to start off with some hadith memorized? Shaykh Samir, you got some? Who's memorized? Sorry? Too much pressure right now? What about you guys? You got anything?
Not right now.
Oh, not really. Okay, khair. Are you guys revising during the class or something, or? I hope not. طيب بسم الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله صلى الله وسلم وبارك على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. I think a few years ago I got this copy of Umdat al-Ahkam from Dar Makkah. I don't know if anyone's had any luck finding a translated copy. It seemed to be quite difficult to find, even PDFs online. But this is a pretty good translation by, I mean the editing is by somebody I know well, a good brother, student of knowledge. But I haven't really come across many copies. But it only has the English translation, it doesn't contain the Arabic with it. The Arabic copies are everywhere. And there's no shortage of, definitely not online, all sorts of copies.
Can I have this copy, please? Can I have this copy, please?
You can have it to have a look. but to keep, then I'll have to find another one to give you one, inshallah. If I do, then you'll be the first one to be gifted, inshallah.
Are they only like small books like
That's all I could find.
Like the small? Okay.
This is all I could find. The size of the writing is okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's all I could find. PDF online also I couldn't find anything that's quite good. Yeah. Who can remind us of what we said about the hadith of travel and fasting last week?
It's easy to go by distance as opposed to us.
Okay, so when it comes to what counts as distance, what kind of distance allows you to travel, allows you to shorten your prayers and also allows you to break your fast? We said there are two approaches. Some scholars specify distance. This is the distance you have to reach, or this is the distance of your destination. Yeah, not the distance you have to have reached yet, just the distance of your destination. And the second approach is to say there is no distance for travel. Anything that's called travel counts as travel. You can shorten your prayer, break your fast. Which is the majority position? The majority of fuqaha, and this is the madhab of this is the position of the four madahib, is to specify distance. And generally speaking, they specify, they make it around 80 kilometers, about 50 miles. So if a person intends to travel 50 miles, they can start to shorten their prayers and they can start to break their fast as soon as they are on the go. As soon as they're on the go and they've left the residential area of where they're staying. Is it better to fast or is it better to break your fast when traveling? Okay, so again we have several views. The position of Malik and Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i too, it seems, is that it's better to fast unless fasting is severely burdensome. Then in that case breaking the fast is better, according to most of the ulama. And Imam Ahmad believes that breaking the fast is better all the time when traveling. Anyway, in summary, it's not a big issue because the companions are in agreement, the Sahaba are in agreement that you can break your fast and you can fast whilst traveling. Today we come to the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, or is it before that? حديث عائشة رضي الله عنها أنها قالت كان يكون علي الصوم من رمضان فما أستطيع أن أقضي إلا في شعبان. I would have obligatory fasts upon me from Ramadan. Yeah? That could be from illness and it could be from menstruation, okay, or any other valid excuse like travel. She says, and I would not find the opportunity to make those days up except in Sha'ban. What does that mean? When? Almost next year, yeah, exactly. Almost next year, just before the next Ramadan comes in. We can take a number of things from this hadith. Who can give us some of them? A number of things can be taken, yeah. Good, so number one, it shows that you're allowed to make up your fast anytime before the next Ramadan. Anytime before the next Ramadan. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay? What if someone delays past that? From this hadith we get the impression that it's not the right thing to do. But are they sinful? According to the majority of ulama, the four madhahib, they're sinful. According to the majority of ulama, they're sinful. I have to double check the Hanafi position on it, but according to the majority of ulama, they're sinful for delaying it without a good excuse. And a good excuse means illness, or constant travel or something along those lines. Okay, let's say they do delay it, and let's say they're sinful. And there's a minority of ulama who don't believe them to be sinful, but let's say they've delayed it till the next Ramadan has entered, and they still haven't made up their fasts. Do they still have to make them up? They still have to make them up. Do they have to do anything else other than making up? Or is it just enough to make it up? According to Imam Ahmad, and this is the view of Malik as well as making up your missed days, you have to feed one poor person per missed day, per day that you've delayed. So let's say that someone has 10 days of Ramadan they've missed. 10 days. Ramadan has entered, the new Ramadan, and they still haven't made up their days. Now, according to most ulama, they're going to be sinful for that. On top of that, according to Imam Ahmad and Malik and some other ulama, they have to feed one poor person, for every day that they've delayed, which means 10 days. If they fasted 5 and left 5, they're going to feed 5 poor people. If they've made up 8 and only left 2 till after the next Ramadan, they're going to feed 2 poor people on top of that. And according to the Hanafi madhab, they do not have to feed any poor person, they just simply make up their day. And that's the preference of Imam al-Bukhari. That's the view also of Imam al-Bukhari in his Sahih. And we don't actually have an authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ which says that you should feed one poor person per day that you miss, which is why al-Bukhari doesn't go with this view. However, Imam Ahmad holds the view because that's the fatwa of some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and is the fatwa of a companion sufficient to oblige? Imam Ahmad prefers going with the fatwa of companions. And according to Bukhari and others, that's not enough. Okay, because the fatwa of a companion could be correct and could be incorrect. We can also take from this hadith that Aisha radiallahu anha was okay with fasting some voluntary days before making up her obligatory fasts. That could be understood from this hadith. Because many ulama say it is unlikely that Aisha radiallahu anha doesn't fast a single voluntary fast. Not Arafah, not Ashura, not any day during the month. Many ulama argue that that's unlikely. And if that's unlikely, that means that she was okay fasting voluntary prayers, voluntary fasts, voluntary days, and then obligatory days. Why do we say that? Because many scholars argue before you fast any voluntary days, you have to first make up your obligatory days. And this question comes up always at the end of Ramadan, doesn't it? Can I fast the 6 days of Shawwal, or do I have to first make qada? That question comes up all the time. This hadith supports which view? It supports the view that you don't have to make qada. You can fast the 6 days of Shawwal, and then afterwards make qada. This hadith could support that view. According to Imam Ahmad, that's not the case. You have to make up your voluntary fast first, your obligatory fast first, and then the voluntary. Why? Because the obligation takes priority. You don't give preference to a voluntary thing when you still have obligations due on you. That's the first thing. Secondly, when it comes to the 6 days of Shawwal specifically, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man sama Ramadan," whoever fasts Ramadan, ثم أتبعه ستة من شوال, and then after that follows it up with 6 days of Shawwal, it's as though they fasted for a whole year, or it's as though they fasted for a whole lifetime. And this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. So that wording suggests that you should first complete your days in Ramadan, and then after that make up the fasts, start to fast in Shawwal. And the fast of Shawwal is another discussion we can come to later when we talk about voluntary fasts. Yeah.
Is it possible to have the intention to do both in a day? So
no. And the reason it's not possible to have both in a day because they are separate and independent acts of worship. There are some acts of worship that are not independent, like praying 2 rak'ahs when you walk into the masjid. That's not an independent act of worship. Meaning, there's no such thing as salatu tahiyyat al-masjid as an independent prayer. Okay? As an independent prayer. All it is that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا دَخَلَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَسْجِدِ فَلَا يَجْلِسْ حَتَّى يُصَلِّ رَكْعَتَيْنِ. If you come into the masjid, don't sit down until you pray 2 rak'ahs. He didn't give it a name. It's not a designated prayer. The concept of tahiyyat al-masjid comes a bit later on. Fuqaha mention it to, just to facilitate. But it's not actually an independent prayer like the obligation of Fajr 2 rak'ahs, like the Sunnah of Fajr 2 rak'ahs. Can you pray the Sunnah of Fajr and Fajr with one intention? Of course not, because it's a separate prayer. Yeah, it's a separate, independent prayer. So when it comes to independent acts of worship, you have to do them separately. You can't have one intention to do both. When it comes to acts of worship that are not independent, like what we call tahiyyatul masjid, when you walk into the masjid, here you can have other intentions, no problem. Intention of praying 2 rak'ahs after making wudu, intention of praying 2 rak'ahs when you walk into the masjid, and intention of the sunnah after maghrib, or the sunnah after isha. All 3 intentions in one is acceptable in that case. Is that clear? It's acceptable because they're not independent prayers. But you can't combine independent prayers or fasts or hajj or umrah, combine them under one intention. Yeah.
In regards to the hadith you mentioned about whoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then follows up with the 6 days of Shawwal, from what I have heard from scholars and from some fatawas, is that you won't get the reward of the 6 days of Shawwal if you haven't fasted the whole month of Ramadan. That means if you haven't made up the obligatory fast. So
that's the view of the Hanabila. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the view of the Hanabila. And so this is the thing with points of difference of opinion. Every time a person can do what's more cautious and what's more complete with certainty, that's better. No scholar is going to say, no, you have to do the voluntary fast first and then do the obligatory. No one's going to say that. So if you fast the qada of Ramadan first, your missed days, and then the voluntary, you've performed the complete ibadah for sure, with certainty. And if someone wants to take the concession, is there a valid scholarly opinion to follow a concession? Yeah, there is. Some women might have missed 2 weeks of fasting. So now that means in Shawwal, she's going to have to fast what? 3 weeks. Okay? 3 weeks of Shawwal. And that's burdensome. That can be a burden. So this hadith of Aisha could well support the other view. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah? Wallahu a'lam. Aisha radiallahu anha also says in the following hadith, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من مات وعليه صيام صام عنه وليه. Whoever fasts, whoever dies with an obligatory fast upon them that they haven't made up, صام عنه وليه. Their relatives should fast on their behalf. End of hadith. This hadith is narrated by who? Okay, Aisha, in which books of hadith? Bukhari and Muslim. The author adds, وَأَخْرَجَهُ Abu Dawood. Abu Dawood also narrates this. Obviously, if a hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, you don't really need to mention it's in Abu Dawood because it doesn't add too much. Yeah, it doesn't add that much value in terms of authenticity of the hadith. But the reason he mentions it is because he wants to quote Abu Dawood. He says Abu Dawood narrates it, وَقَالْ هَذَا فِي النَّذْرِ خَاصَّةً. This hadith only applies to nadhr. If someone has made a vow to Allah to fast. Oh Allah, if you help this birth of my wife go through with ease, I will fast one whole week as a type of thanks and show of gratitude. Oh Allah, if you help me to pay off my debt, I will fast a whole month. Oh Allah, if this, I will do this. Okay, that's a nadhr, that's a vow. So Abu Dawood is saying this hadith, which sounds general, doesn't it? It sounds like it applies to any fast. Abu Dawood says هذا في النذر خاصة. This is only for nadhr, that type of fast. So if someone dies having missed days of Ramadan, should their relative fast on their behalf according to Abu Dawood? No. Then he says وهو قول أحمد بن حنبل. And this is the position of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Abu Dawood is one of the closest students of Imam Ahmad. Abu Dawood is one of the most important students of Imam Ahmad. And his Sunan Abu Dawood, the Sunan of Abu Dawood, is an excellent book of fiqh, very much in line with the fiqh of Imam Ahmad as well. And Abu Dawood has some very important books called Masail, questions to Imam Ahmad, asking him about issues of fiqh and hadith and things like that. So, when it comes to this hadith, we have three major opinions that ulama hold. The first is the view of the majority of early fuqaha, and that's that no one fasts on behalf of anyone, and no one prays on behalf of anyone. And that seems to be in opposition to this hadith, doesn't it? This is the view of Malik, Sufyan al-Thawri, Abu Hanifa, and the Shafi'i too. Imam Malik argues that this is the ijma' of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Imam Malik in his Muwatta argues, he says, I've seen none of the companions and Tabi'een say that you should fast on behalf of another person if they die. And that's a very strong statement because Imam Malik is a student of the Tabi'een. And Imam Malik is one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to the fiqh of the Sahaba. So that's the first position. The second view is the view of Imam Ahmad and Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, and it's attributed to Abu Ubaid and a number of Imams of Hadith. And it's the view of Abdullah ibn Abbas from the Sahaba. And that is what Abu Dawood mentioned here, that this hadith only applies to what? Nadhr, a vow, an obligatory vow that someone's made upon themselves. It doesn't apply to Ramadan. It doesn't apply to missed days of Ramadan. It doesn't apply to a kaffara. If someone has relations in the month of Ramadan, they have to fast 2 consecutive months and they die before doing that. This hadith does not apply to that. And this opinion is supported by a number of ahadith. The first is that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, he narrates that somebody came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said that this person said, my mother passed away and she had a fast of nadhr, a vow. Should I fast on her behalf? She passed away before fasting it, So the Prophet ﷺ said yes. And that's quite a strong hadith. And this hadith of Aisha is quite a strong hadith, which is why it's difficult to go with the position of the majority. Even though it's the view of Malik and Abu Hanifa and Sufyan, and normally opposing them is not a good idea, because they're the fuqaha of the ummah in their time. But these ahadith are so sound, and Ibn Abbas gives this fatwa as well. It's difficult to reject the idea of fasting on behalf of those who passed away completely. Ibn Abbas himself gives the fatwa, authentically narrated from him, narrated by Abu Dawud in his Sunan, that if somebody dies in Ramadan having missed days, then their relatives should pay on their behalf, feed a poor person on their behalf for each day missed. And if someone dies not having performed a fast of nadhr, a vow, then their relatives can fast on their behalf. So this is in line with the view of Imam Ahmad and Ishaq ibn Rahawayh and others. The third opinion is the view of Abu Thawr, and it seems like the view of Dawood as well. And Ibn Hazm rahimahullah ta'ala strongly defended this opinion, is that this hadith of Aisha applies generally. Any fast that someone misses, their relatives fast it on their behalf. They say we take the general hadith. The problem with the generality of the hadith, according to most scholars, is that it goes against the principle of Sharia. And that is that no one should be obliged to do anything on behalf of someone else. You imagine we apply this opinion to 2 consecutive months of kafara. Family's going to fight over who's going to do that. You fast. No, I'm not fasting that. You fast. So, obliging somebody to fast because their relative has not fasted, especially if their relative has an excuse, is a difficult position. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah seemed to say, look, we can't take this too generally. It goes against the principle of people doing things on behalf of one another, and no one is held to account for someone else. However, we do have a hadith on the issue, and we can't just ignore those ahadith either. So he tried to come to a middle ground and say those ahadith should be interpreted as being just applying to nadhr. And that's because a fast is something Allah originally obligated upon people. If they can't do it, it's between them and Allah Ta'ala. Whereas the vow is something that a person obligated upon themselves. And so for that to be off their shoulders, their relative should do so on their behalf. Having said that, even according to Ahmad, the relatives should do so on their behalf out of recommendation, not out of obligation. Because we can't force someone to fast a fast that's got nothing to do with them. We can't oblige them to fast something that has nothing to do with them. Even according to the view of Imam Ahmad, that applies to the vow. That only applies in the case of out of recommendation. So I know that's a lengthy summary, and sometimes I hesitate to go into khilaf, difference of opinion, and I'm tempted to just mention one view for the sake of facilitating. Is that better, or is it better to mention different opinions? No, it's up to you guys. You tell me, because teaching is different approaches. Sometimes it's more appropriate to stick to one view, and sometimes appropriate to mention various opinions.
Case by case.
Huh?
Case by case.
Yeah, okay. At least being aware that some khilaf exists, and also why scholars disagreed, is helpful. Because if we just went through this hadith without commenting, we would all assume that's it. If someone dies having missed Ramadan, their relatives have to make it up on their behalf, and therefore sometimes extra commentary is needed as well. Yeah.
So does that relieve the sin of the person who missed that day?
Yes, inshallah. Hopefully that relieves. He's asking if that relieves the sin on the person that missed those days. Even though according to the Hanabila, if they are sinful, there's no qada, because that's now between them. And if their relatives decide, we're not going to fast on their behalf, we're going to feed on their behalf instead, one poor person per day, that's okay as well. Wallahu a'lam. عن عبد الله بن عباس رضي الله عنهما أنه قال جاء رجل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله إن أمي ماتت وعليها صوم شهر. My mother passed away and she has a whole month that she missed. أفأقضيه عنها, should I fast it on her behalf? قال لو كان على أمك دين أكنت أو لو كان على أمك دين أكنت قاضيه عنها. If your mother had a debt to pay off, would you pay it on her behalf? He said yes. قال فدين الله أحق أن يقضى. So he said the debt that belongs to Allah is then more worthy of being paid off. This hadith is also narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. He says وفي رواية, in another narration in Sahih Muslim, he says a woman came جاءت امرأة إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت يا رسول الله إن أمي ماتت وعليها صوم نذر. Okay, and this is in this edition is actually in Bukhari and Muslim. This extra edition. أفأصوم عنها, should I fast on her behalf? Then he gave the same response. If your mother had a debt, would you pay off on her behalf? And so this edition of nadhr supports the view that the author is mentioning earlier, that it applies only to nadhr of Allah. He says عن سهل بن سعد الساعدي رضي الله عنه, what's the time? أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يزال الناس بخير ما عجلوا الفطر. People will continue to be upon goodness so long as they hasten to the iftar. As soon as Maghrib has entered, they break their fast straight away. That's the sunnah, not to delay. That's the sunnah for obligatory fasts, and it's the sunnah for voluntary fasts. However, when it comes to voluntary fasts, if somebody wants to delay their iftar all the way until suhoor time because they want to lengthen their fast, then al-Bukhari narrated in his Sahih that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تواصلوا, don't connect one day with another. Don't connect one day with another, i.e. fast 2 consecutive days without iftar and without suhoor. He said, don't do that. وَأَيُّكُمْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يُوَاصِلْ فَلْيُوَاصِلْ حَتَّى السَّحَرِ. And whoever wants to do that, then they should only go up to the suhoor period. In other words, let's say I was fasting today. Instead of eating after Maghrib, I wait until just before Fajr, an hour before Fajr. Then I should eat then. I shouldn't connect 2 consecutive days. Even though the Prophet ﷺ used to do that, but he's an exception to the rule, as we'll see maybe in some hadith later on. So the sunnah is to break the fast. We don't have to have a full meal before Fajr, before Maghrib, but we should break our fast, and then there's no harm in praying Maghrib, and afterwards we can eat as freely as we want. If there's a slight delay, 10 minutes of iftar, 15 minutes of iftar, and then Salat al-Maghrib, it's not a big problem. Different masajid have different ways of doing things. Either is not a big deal. It's not a big issue. So long as the delay is not too long. Because Maghrib should be prayed, relatively at the beginning of the time. That was the consistent practice of the Prophet ﷺ. Maghrib was always prayed at the beginning. But delaying for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is not a big issue. Allahu A'lam. In the hadith of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أقبل الليل من هاهنا وأدبر النهار من هاهنا فقد أفطر الصائم. If the night has entered, i.e. Maghrib, and the daytime has come to an end, then that's the end of the fast. And that's consistent with the hadith before, that you should break your fast as soon as Maghrib has entered. وعن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما أنه قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الوصال. And I think we'll make this the final hadith inshallah. Abdullah ibn Umar says the Prophet ﷺ prohibited the companions from wisal. What's wisal? Continued fasting, connecting 2 days, 3 days, 4 days without breaking at all. قالوا يا رسول الله إنك تواصل. They said, but you do that. قال إني لست كهيئتكم إني أطعم وأسقى. He said, I'm not like you. Allah provides me with food and drink. He says, ورواه أبو هريرة وعائشة وأنس بن مالك. These three companions narrate the same hadith. ولمسلم عن أبي سعيد الخدري عنه أنه قال فأيكم أراد أن يواصل فليواصل إلى السحر. And in a narration, حتى السحر. If anyone does want to do wisal, they should go up to where? Suhoor. It's the hadith that I mentioned a minute ago. So now how many companions narrate this hadith? 4? Final answer? 5. Because we have Ibn Umar. And we have the 3 mentioned here, Abu Hurairah and Aisha and Anas. And we have the 5th one, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. That's 5 people in Sahih Bukhari. Okay, that's 5 in Sahih Bukhari. And other companions elsewhere as well. So, once some of the companions didn't listen. They wanted to do exactly what the Prophet ﷺ was doing. They thought he's telling us not to do it because he wants to be soft with us. We don't want to be soft on ourselves. We want to follow his sunnah, what he's doing. So, he kept them fasting, and then kept them fasting, and then the month of Shawwal entered. So Eid. So this was at the end of Ramadan. They wanted to consecutively fast. And he said, if the month had been longer, I would have pushed you further. As if to say, I would have really punished you. And let you feel the pain of not breaking not breaking your fast. كَالْمُنَكِّلِ لَهُمْ. Like he wanted to give them a telling off. When the Prophet ﷺ says, I'm not like you, Allah feeds me and provides me with drink. Is that literal food and drink? Or is that metaphorical? We don't know. Okay, that's one answer. Both how? Actual food and drink, and also, strength. Okay. Any third answer? What's the problem if we say it's actual food and drink? He's broken his fast. He's no longer fasting. So that's why the vast majority of ulama say, and that's the relied upon opinion for sure, is that that's not literal food and drink, but Allah Ta'ala provides him with the strength to continue, a type of strength that everyone else isn't given. But it's not actual food and drink that comes from the heaven, that Jibreel, for example, brings or something, because then it would be breaking the fast, and the rules of fasting apply to him as they apply to everyone else. So that's that on wisal. And then we come to a number of ahadith that relate to voluntary fasts, which inshallah ta'ala I hope we'll complete next lesson by going through, because there's quite a few ahadith on voluntary fast, so we want to do that as a separate lesson, and i'tikaf. But that leaves us with what? Only one lesson before Ramadan. Okay, we were supposed to go through the verses of fasting as well. Anyway, we'll try to do our best. Maybe next week will be a slightly prolonged lesson with some extra sabr. We'll try to get through as much as we can, inshallah. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
The hadith you mentioned, the right of Allah.
Sorry?
The right of Allah about
Yeah.
Isn't that hadith emphasize more clearly? That shah, is it regarding the Ramadan or is it regarding something else?
Where? Why does that support?
The hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar.
Does it say Ramadan? Does it say Ramadan?
Yes.
says shahr, it says a month. And a month doesn't necessarily have to be Ramadan. A month could be anything. And what's supported by that is the other narration. Because remember, hadith interpret each other. He says, وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ صَوْمُ نَذْرٍ. Do you see that? In another narration, the fast of another. So we have to interpret fasting a month as being a fast of nadhr, a vow, not Ramadan. Because hadith interpret each other. And what further supports that view is that the Fettah of Ibn Abbas, who is the one narrating this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, the Fettah of Ibn Abbas is that fasting on behalf of a relative who died only applies to nadhr. And like I said, that's narrated by Abu Dawood in his Sunan with an authentic isnad. So, two things are essential when interpreting a hadith. Number one, checking all the narrations. Because narrators can sometimes narrate with wording. Not with general meaning, not with the precise wording. So when we compare all the narrations, we get a clearer idea. The second thing we have to do is to look at the fatwa of that companion too. Because that gives us how he interpreted the hadith. And if he's the one narrating the hadith, then generally speaking, his interpretation of the hadith is most reliable. Because he will have the context of what the Prophet ﷺ meant when he made that statement. And there are other principles as well when interpreting hadith, but these are two essential ones. Allahu A'lam. Any other comments or additions? Jazakumullahu khairah. Yeah, go on.
Okay, for example, fasting, for example, Yom al-Arafah.
Yes.
And let's say it combines with Yom al-Khamis.
Yeah.
So let's say Sunnah, so I want to understand clearly. So you can combine intention, Sunnah with Sunnah, or when it comes to Wajib, Sunnah you have to distinguish.
No, not necessarily. Sometimes you can't combine a Sunnah with a Sunnah. For example, you can't combine the intention of a Sunnah prayer, the Sunnah of 2 rak'ahs before Dhuhr and 2 rak'ahs after Dhuhr into 2 rak'ahs. Take a shortcut. You can't do that, even though they're both Sunnah prayers. Yeah? You can't intend, for example, let's say fasting Ashura, fasting the day of Ashura, and also fasting a fast of nadhr. Okay, unless that nadhr is one which you made general and complete. So the point is that if it's two separate, independent sunan or wajibat, you can't combine them. Thursday could be argued is not an independent sunnah, because it's narrated that the Messenger ﷺ preferred fasting on Thursdays because that's a day in which Allah Ta'ala takes up good deeds to people. He says, فَأُحِبُّ أَنْ يُرْفَعَ عَمَلِي وَأَنَا صَائِمٌ. I like for my good deeds to be raised up whilst I'm fasting. And that can apply even if you have a different intention, like Ashura or Arafah or something else. So that's the rule. Sometimes it needs a bit of research. Is this an independent sunnah or not? It needs a bit of look into it, but that's the rule. Allahu A'lam. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.